Sin más preámbulos, es un honor presentarles al orador principal y los panelistas de esta sesión. Señor Robert F. Mujica, hijo, director ejecutivo de la Junta de Supervisión y Administración Financiera para Puerto Rico, aquí a mi derecha. El honorable Omar Marrero Díaz, secretario de Estado y director ejecutivo de la Autoridad de Asesoría Financiera y Agencia Fiscal, FOMB. Aquí, muy bien. Honorable Manuel Sidre, secretario del Departamento de Desarrollo Económico y Comercio de Puerto Rico. Buenos días, secretario. Y el honorable Rafael Tatito Hernández, presidente de la Cámara de Representantes de Puerto Rico. Bienvenidos nuevamente. Para esta sesión contábamos con 1 hora de tiempo, pero como la agenda ha estado un poco atropelladita, vamos a tratar de llevarlo a 50 minutos y había unos 10 minutos de preguntas del público. Si las tienen a bien, hay unas tarjetitas por ahí que me pueden acercar y yo trataré de colarlas de ser posible. ¿Okay? Además, les menciono que las biografías y presentaciones de nuestros distinguidos conferenciantes están disponibles en la página web de la Cámara de Comercio, www.cámarapr.org. Sin más, en estos momentos quisiera iniciar la sesión con la presentación del señor Robert F. Mujica, hijo, director ejecutivo de la Junta de Supervisión y Administración Financiera para Puerto Rico, quien tendrá a cargo el speech de esta mañana. He will be speaking in English during this session, but then in the panel he will shift to Spanish. Welcome, Executive Director. You can start.
Gracias. Buenos días a todos y todos. Gracias al presidente de la Cámara de Comercio por la invitación, Cameron McKenzie, y su directora ejecutiva, Lisa García. Mis saludos para el secretario de Estado, Omar Marrero, al presidente de la Cámara de Representantes, Rafael Tatito Hernández, el secretario del Departamento de Desarrollo Económico, Manuel Sidre, y la distinguida moderadora de este panel, Denise Flores. Para mí es un placer estar aquí con todos ustedes. Voy a hablar inglés para comunicar mejor mi mensaje. Thank you for inviting me to speak today about Puerto Rico's roadmap for economic growth. I'm honored to be here, and I'm pleased to be able to speak at a conference about economic growth in Puerto Rico and at a conference dedicated to innovation. I look around this room and I see all of the ingredients for both innovation and economic growth. Puerto Rico has the people, Puerto Rico has the potential, and Puerto Rico has the entrepreneurial spirit to innovate and succeed. This is a unique moment in Puerto Rico's history. We are in the process of completing the final part of the debt restructuring, closing not only the chapter, but the book on the largest public sector bankruptcy in the history of the United States. The last part, Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA, is perhaps the most complicated and most painful than any of the other parts. And the pressure on the board is considerable. That pressure comes from the bondholders, who demand more than we have offered so far, and from the public, who is worried about the electricity bills. Nevertheless, we hope to close this last chapter of the debt restructuring very soon, and in the best interest of all parties involved. We know what is at stake for Puerto Rico. On the fiscal side, the most difficult decisions to right-size government spending are behind us. These decisions are often presented as a false choice between austerity and prosperity. This is not the case. It is a choice between being fiscally responsible and being irresponsible. The new fiscal plan for Puerto Rico, to be certified this month, reflects a turn from stabilizing government's finances to investing in our future. It's a transformation plan. It looks forward and is focused on the choices and investments that will help to restore growth and prosperity. To the people of Puerto Rico, after this long period of crisis and economic decline, finally, Puerto Rico's economic engine is running again. Growth has rebounded strongly after the COVID-19 pandemic, as it has in other parts of the country. To a large part, this recovery is driven by an unprecedented influx of one-time federal funds. These recovery funds represent a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rebuild the economy, but it is up to us, the government, the business community, and residents, to turn the recovery into economic prosperity that is long-lasting. When I took this job 5 months ago, I knew what lay behind Puerto Rico: fiscal crisis, natural disaster, but also a long economic decline that predated the crises, and a failure to keep up with hyper-competitive global economy. I saw the opportunity ahead very clearly, the opportunity to take this moment to work with the government to end the bankruptcy, to bring fiscal stability and economic stimulus as the beginning of another era of growth and as the beginning of real change, the beginning of a period of success. I saw the opportunity for the Oversight Board to play as a decisive role after the bankruptcy as during the bankruptcy. My time here as executive director is limited. The Oversight Board will disappear. I can't tell you when, but we are certainly working on it. But when this Oversight Board disappears, our work will have left a mark on Puerto Rico. Our reforms will have changed Puerto Rico, and the mandates Congress gave to help Puerto Rico achieve fiscal responsibility and regain market access to capital markets will have been fulfilled. This is personal for me. My parents' family left Puerto Rico at a time in Puerto Rico's history known as the Great Migration, where many families left the island to find opportunity elsewhere. A time when the island's population saw a decline of over 20%, a time when families on the island thought their only hope was to leave Puerto Rico, a place they love, to find good work and educate themselves elsewhere. That was over 60 years ago, and Puerto Rico has come a long way. I am a product of that era and circumstance, and I am lucky to be able to return to Puerto Rico to work with you, to create an environment where there is opportunity and investment, where people want to stay in communities and work and raise a family on the island. I came with the understanding that my job is to put myself out of a job, but I know I will be building a home. So how do we get there? As the Oversight Board, as government, as the business community, we have to focus on one single goal: economic growth. Economic growth is the key to unlocking Puerto Rico's future. Every investment, every reform, everything, every initiative, every law must be viewed through that lens. That is my mission. The challenges are formidable, and so are the opportunities. Puerto Rico received approximately $120 billion in federal recovery funds, equivalent to over 150% of its 2022 GNP in the form of disaster relief and COVID-19 stimulus. For me, to put this in context, when I was the budget director of New York State, the federal funding equivalent to New York would have been $3 trillion. It is an extraordinary opportunity, but our analysis does not point to sustained growth without change. If these funds are not invested to stimulate growth, if we strip the effects of relief funds from our economic projections, Puerto Rico's economic growth would decline over the next 5 years. Even now, Puerto Rico's GNP, including federal funds, has not returned to the fiscal year levels of 2016. Some may challenge specific data points, but when I sit down with Puerto Rico's economists, not one challenges the overall trends that we must overcome. The point is not whether the decline is 0.5%, 0.1%, or 1%. The point is we need to focus and we need to act together. Government, business, nonprofits, civic organizations, conservatives, liberals, all of us have to work together to focus on one issue that unites us all: a better future for the people of the island. Economic growth is the key to unlock that future. Again, every law, every political decision, every reform, every investment must be viewed through that singular lens. So what do we do? What does the Oversight Board do? Before I started this job, I sat down with 7 board members without PowerPoint presentations, without spreadsheets. We talked about Puerto Rico and the next steps to prioritize. The outcome and the mandate to me was to focus on these issues. Continue the energy sector reforms, Reliable, affordable power is a prerequisite to a stable, growing, modern economy. Education. Puerto Rico's children deserve a better education system, and Puerto Rico's economy needs an education system that performs. Tax reform. Puerto Rico needs a fairer and more effective tax system for all. And economic development and infrastructure. Puerto Rico needs to turn this recovery into a sustainable growth and economy that provides opportunities for the people who live here and creates incentives for investors to invest here. The new fiscal plan introduces a new path for reforming education in Puerto Rico, and engagement with key stakeholders has already begun. In survey after survey, employers report that they cannot find the workers that they need and that skilled positions go unfilled. And investors looking to locate and invest cite the quality of the workforce as a top concern. Natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the challenges and delayed progress. However, in 2022, public education students scored the lowest in the United States on standardized tests. The Oversight Board will be engaging with key stakeholders, including the governor, federal agency partners, educators, principals, and non-government organizations, to find common ground and to make sure that the billions of dollars that are invested in the education system unlock the potential in our students. The Oversight Board supports a comprehensive, holistic, and long-term tax reform for Puerto Rico. But the Oversight Board has long held and communicated that tax reform is essential for Puerto Rico's return to sustainable economic growth. The government must continue efforts to reduce the tax system's complexity, enhance equity, increase transparency, reduce tax administrative compliance costs, and maintain, if not enhance, overall revenue. If done right, tax reform will result in increased revenues, not less. A review of tax expenditures must be considered before Puerto Rico issues more than 400 plus tax incentives valued at more than $23 billion. Any potential reform must be fiscally responsible and adhere to certain principles. Tax incentives should be evaluated based strictly on a return on investment criteria, and those that do not provide a significant positive return should be eliminated or reduced. Any potential tax reform should be linked to the overall economic development strategy. Finally, tax reform must work to attract new investment without harming local businesses. It must incentivize Puerto Rico's business to expand and hire, and too often, the focus of economic development and innovation assumes that investments from outside lead to economic growth only. We need to attract from the outside of Puerto Rico, but this doesn't mean that we should overlook the talent, the innovation, and yes, the capital that we have right here in Puerto Rico. The sheer power of growth that I see in this room, and should be a matter of pride for us all, is a source of growth and a reason for hope. You deserve our support, and you should be a big part of an economic development plan for Puerto Rico. Any successful economic development plan also relies on a reliable electricity. That is why the energy reform was one of the first reforms that the Oversight Board tackled. Today, the PREPA fiscal plan is almost entirely implemented. Working with the government, we broke up the inefficient government monopoly. We transferred not ownership, but management to private operators. Puerto Rico retains the valuable asset, still owns the assets, but government no longer manages it. We created a path to implement the will of Puerto Rico's elected leaders to move aggressively to renewable energy, and the power system is now overseen by an independent regulator. The building blocks are in place. This doesn't mean that we are done. I know electricity is not yet reliable. I know PREPA is way behind in moving to renewable energy. I am not satisfied, but the point is that we've created a system that can, will, and is improving, rather than being stuck with the old PREPA that would never move, never improve, never change. PREPA had no incentive to change. For Luma and Haneda, a lot is at stake: profit, reputation, business success. Luma and Haneda cannot survive without success. Unlike PREPA, they cannot stand still. I'm convinced that we will see change. Electricity will become more reliable, more affordable, and cleaner. We are just at the beginning of that change. We must also continue with the reforms to make it easier to do business in Puerto Rico. We must reduce obstacles to starting and sustaining a business. We need to continue with the permit reforms that have already started and the property registration reforms. And we need to reduce the many licenses that do nothing but create a barrier to entry. Let me turn to my final point. We need to maintain fiscal stability. I'll repeat it. We need to maintain fiscal stability. The basic principles of budgeting are simple. These principles apply to the Commonwealth, to the states, federal government, just like they apply to households and families. There is always a temptation to borrow. There is always a temptation to spend more than you have. There is always a temptation to put what on credit until the bill finally comes due. That bill came due. The debt restructuring that we are at the end of reduced the government's massive, vastly fluctuating annual debt payments from over $3 billion to a stable, predictable, and affordable $1.15 billion per year. That is a huge success and a key element of fiscal stability. Fiscal year 22, which ended on June 30th of last year, was the first fiscal year for which the government provided the Oversight Board with a general fund budget the Oversight Board could certify as compliant with the fiscal plan. The government, however, added incremental expenses throughout the year without proactively identifying resources to fund these costs. For the current year, 2023 fiscal year, the legislature did not submit a timely and compliant budget to the Legislature Board for certification, to the Oversight Board for certification, and as a result, the Oversight Board was required to certify a budget for the Commonwealth and to submit it to the government. Further, the legislature continued its trend of passing laws during the fiscal year that reduce revenues or increase expenditures without identifying ways to put that incremental cost or find ways to pay for it. I indicated earlier, it is premature to predict when the Oversight Board might terminate. But for now, only the Oversight Board's presence prevents Puerto Rico from falling back into budget deficits. By the time the Oversight Board terminates, the government must be able to pass and maintain balanced budgets with a long-term, multi-year financial plan that is in balance. Otherwise, we end up in deficits and the kind of painful adjustments that are so difficult to implement by any elected government. We must institutionalize the structure that would prevent such an imbalance, and we are working closely with the legislature to operationalize a nonpartisan legislative fiscal office to assess the cost of legislation before it is enacted. The capacity to score legislation before its passage is essential for fiscal discipline and responsibility. For now, the Oversight Board remains the only institution that consistently scores legislation. On Friday, the Oversight Board certified an amended budget for the current year, 2023, to reflect revised revenue projections and incorporate investments and expenditures as defined in the fiscal plan. Governor Pierluisi submitted a compliant amended budget to the Oversight Board in accordance with the fiscal plan. The legislature, however, did not pass an amended budget or submit an amended budget to the Oversight Board. It was the third consecutive time the two chambers of Puerto Rico legislature failed to submit a budget for the government. In every democracy, the right to determine government spending rests with the legislature entirely. It is the legislature's superior right and its primary responsibility. It may strike you and the panelists who follow me today as I'm putting much fine point on the issue of balanced budget, but as a former budget director, I feel the effect of PREPA on the budget process. Congress created the Oversight Board with its fiscal authority for a reason. The reason was bankruptcy. Congress gave us no execution authority, no law enforcement authority, and that was wise. The budget under PREPA is our main tool. The budget is a key element of fiscal responsibility owed to the people of Puerto Rico, and it is the very core of stability for the island. The governor and the Oversight Board are currently working on the fiscal year 2020-24 budget, and I hope the members of the Oversight Board will receive a government budget for certification submitted by the governor, approved by the legislature, that is compliant with the fiscal plan, so we can take another step forward and find the path to improve education, implement structural reforms, and get the economy growing permanently. The Oversight Board has achieved a lot. Right-sizing government spending was painful, but necessary to create stability. The debt restructuring was successful. When we are done, the debt will be reduced from $71 billion to $34 billion, and the government will spend less than 6 cents of every dollar on debt payment. It was almost 30 cents before the restructuring. Stability, predictability, budgetary discipline, and the foundation for sustainable economic growth. Every decision, every priority, every project has to be seen through the lens of economic progress. Thank you.